Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind Games, an extension of the Mythic Mind Fellowship, which pursues wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. All right, welcome back as we continue with our Final Fantasy series, now with Final Fantasy IV, which is, we've already alluded to this, or actually outright said it, that this is a huge step forward in the storytelling of the series. This is, I would say, the first time where you really have a story in any kind of really meaningful sense. I mean, two kind of moves in that direction, but four is definitely a huge leap forward to the point where it's kind of hard to do a very succinct summary of the plot real quickly. But I mean, in very broad terms, I mean, it's interesting that you start off kind of on the wrong side of things. That is it Cecil or Cecil? What do you guys say?
I don't know if I even pronounce it consistently. I'm going to say Cecil for now.
Yeah. I always said Cecil when I was a kid, but I believe in the Dissidia games, they say Cecil, so I'll go with that.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty much how I've been. I've had Cecil in my mind ever since I was a kid, but I think Cecil is appropriate. Anyways, so Cecil, your main character, yeah, he's headed off. He's like the head of this airship division, and they go and they attack this town to seize the water crystal. And he feels pretty uncomfortable about all this, about how he's treated these apparently innocent people. And in voicing that, the king, who it became strangely malevolent all of a sudden, well, he's not a big fan of this, and so he sends you off on a mission along with your buddy who stood up with you, Kain, the dragoon. And then in this mission, you end up kind of unknowingly launching this bomb attack on this other town, and so it's you're not comfortable very much with who you are, and so you've got that wrestling moving forward. And eventually you come to the realization, or you're told rather, that Cecil needs to turn away altogether from his dark knight way of life and embrace the light, become a paladin. You get this redemption arc here, which I think is significant, and we'll return back to that. But as you're kind of dealing with the mystery of what is the real force behind this change in your kingdom. You come to find that the king has been really replaced by a monster. There's a lot of brainwashing going on, as what you think is going to be the chief antagonist, Golbez, is pulling all these strings. There's some Tower of Babel imagery. He's trying to reach to the moon. And then at the very end, in Final Fantasy fashion, you learn that the main villain is not the main villain, and that there's a greater demonic entity that's pulling the strings of the main villain. And you get that Star Wars moment again, where you find out that the guy who you thought was the main villain was actually your brother, and, which is not very much unlike what they did in Final Fantasy II. So I mean, that's more or less the basic plot. There's a lot that happens that we'll kind of get into, but um, so I mean, tell me about your experience with this game. David, why don't you kick us off?
Well, yeah, I'd say this is my second favorite Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy VII came along and knocked this one off the throne for me. But yeah, I got it for Christmas in 1991 when it came out, and I played through it, I think, in like 4 days over Christmas vacation. And I think it took like 36 hours the first time, and then I played through it again, and it only took me like 16 hours to play through it again. But I've definitely finished this one more times than any other Final Fantasy game. But I still distinctly remember just the first time I was playing it, the scene where Cecil, he's all distraught. He goes to his room, turns the lights out, he lays in his bed and he's just wrestling with what he did in Mysidia. And then Rosa comes in to visit him, and, just through subtle sprite movements like him turning away and the musical cues and stuff, it was a surprising amount of emotion that they were conveying in a video game, really for the first time to me, and then the next morning, he and Kain meet, and then they march out of the castle gate while the fanfare's playing. And I was just blown away by the storytelling capabilities when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very cinematic experience, a potential literary experience, depending on how we frame video games, which I know that's an ongoing question. But um, Yeah, I mean, even in 2025, I mean, going back and, I just played it pretty recently, and it's incredible what they're able to do from a storytelling angle in such an old game. Like I said, I mean, relying on the sprites and the limited technological capabilities that they had, that, I mean, they're telling a story that easily rivals, many story-driven video games today. I mean, even I would argue many books and movies today, which
Mhm.
is again, pretty remarkable. And I think that's obviously one reason why this tends to be a fan favorite of those who have played the older games.
Yeah, and I guess for myself, I played this one like many of the Final Fantasies a bit late. I played it after six and after Chrono Trigger, which both resonated with me a bit more in story terms. And then I played Final Fantasy IV on the Game Boy Advance remake, along with several of the others in the series. And then later, there's a DS remake of this one as well that's in like basic 3D that I also played, though they're very, very similar in storytelling. But having replayed just a little bit of it recently, I'm reminded of just like once again, I know I've mentioned this on several of these games, but it just moves so fast. Like the plot beats get like just a few minutes a piece to happen, and then you're off doing the next thing. So it's very brisk, and I actually appreciate that. But it's also striking how ambitious the story is for its time. Like we're talking about Final Fantasy 1 through 3, all of which are trying to experiment with story, but they're still all kind of staying on mostly the basic side. Ford is just playing with a ton of stuff, and it just feels like they've got wild idea after wild idea going on. Like you start with a redemption story, which is pretty decently told, I feel, for Cecil. And then suddenly, yeah, you find out that Baron is being taken over and mind controlled. Uh, then you're going after the crystals in typical Final Fantasy fashion. You're going to this weirdly technologically advanced tower all of a sudden. Um, you end up learning there's like four more crystals in like an underworld, and like there's like an underside to the Tower of Babel, like deep underground. So you're doing all that stuff there. Then suddenly you're going to the moon. And you've got the Darth Vader moment with Golbez. And yeah, it's just like it is like firing on all cylinders on imagination. And so there's just like a constant fun to it, but also like tons of characters where it's trying really hard to do something interesting with all of them. Lots of themes of heroic sacrifice. But yeah, it's really interesting how much it's trying to do.
Yeah, and for that reason, that even though it's very story driven, it couldn't easily be translated into something like a movie. It would take a series to deal with it, because there is just so much stuff that happens, so many moving parts, moving characters that just come in and come out. Usually, when they go out, they're dying some heroic death. It's just one after another. They're just people just sacrificing themselves. Which I mean, obviously, there's an important moral Christian lesson that can be drawn from that. Not that I need to like beat that over the head. It's kind of obvious. But I mean, I just think that it's I mean it's a good game. Like it's got redemption, it's got sacrifice. There's a lot of just really wholesome stuff that drives the narrative.
And this is the first game that Takashi Tokita was the lead designer on, and he went on to be director of like Chrono Trigger and some other games like that. But he had originally wanted to be a stage actor, I learned, and so I think some of that kind of comes through in the way they're storytelling in this. Apparently, they had to cut out the majority of their intended dialogue for the game just because of memory limitations on the Super Nintendo. So they made sure that what they removed was all kind of superfluous, just color dialogue and not the actual story
I think we
to
lost
be more
David.
ambitious than they actually were able to do. Oh, did you lose
Oh,
me?
was it me that we lost for a second?
No,
No,
yeah. David froze for a little bit.
Okay.
did we miss any of my brilliant
I think the
predictions?
last little tail end of what you were saying.
Um, Yeah, I just think that their plan was even to be more ambitious than they were able to pull off just because of the Super Nintendo's limitations, because they had to cut out so much dialogue that they had intended.
Yeah, that is an interesting point too, and it's something we don't think about right now, like, because we think of text as being very easy to store, but this was still in an era where every byte mattered, and they had to be very careful how much text they included. Like once you got into the next generation after this, text was not an issue, completely negligible. You could have as much as you want. But Yeah, and I think that's another thing that struck me when I was replaying some of it recently was that it feels like the scenes, although I did say they go very fast, like compared to coming off of like three, it does feel like the scenes are really trying to have a little more meat on them, and a little more drama. And you can see the dialogue is trying really hard to condense as much presentation as it can, while still giving the characters a little bit more time to breathe.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's so I'm sure the creators really appreciated when they got to the PlayStation era and they had space for all the text that they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what makes this different than even two, which is fairly story driven, is that the characters are actually distinct and they really matter. Like their personalities matter. Each character has a role to play, so it's much more of a character driven kind of story. I mean, even looking at Cecil's redemption arc. There's a lot of like mythological elements tied into that redemption. I mean, that's not totally dissimilar from some of the stuff that I tend to say on the Star Wars conversation. Like when he has to go to the Mount Ordeals, so he has to go through this trial by ordeal, which it's a very medieval type of thing, and when he's there, he encounters something like the spirit of his father, which connects him with the light. And then, but before he can, leave, that he has to first do battle with his own dark self, right? And he does that not by fighting. Like the only way to get out of that sequence is by not fighting. And so you get this death and resurrection kind of idea here that you have to encounter the spirit of your father, and out of that you kind of lay yourself down only to be renewed in the right kind of way, so now you're adequately situated to fight against the forces of evil, because darkness can't drive out darkness. You need the light for that, but to attain to the light you have to undergo a kind of sacrifice of yourself. And so there's a lot of very rich symbolism, a lot of nods to various mythological concepts that are put into this redemption arc. And just it's a very sophisticated way, which again is pretty remarkable given where we are in the kind of gaming history.
Yeah, and early on in the game, you've mastered the dark sword because the king wanted you to, but there are a lot of enemies there w- before you become a paladin that your powers just don't work well on them. Like your sword will do one damage on it because you're fighting evil creatures with this evil power, which I thought was a pretty neat. You kind of have to rely on your companions, and you kind of feel a little of the tension that the character is supposed to be feeling.
Yeah, that was the point I was going to make because that was like the last part I was able to play before um, today. But yeah, like it's like what Andrew was talking about with symbolism. Like the symbolism goes all the way down to the game mechanics, to where you feel that like sense of like I need to change in order to be able to be effective in what I want to accomplish. And even because like every in a lot of the older Final Fantasy games, like every job class has its own unique like option you can pick in battle. And for the Dark Knight, it's darkness, which hits everything for some damage on the field, but it takes away from your health. So you have the sense, even in just how the Dark Knight class works, that Cecil is playing as, like that it's actually like hurting you and it's taking from your soul to be able to be in that role.
Right. And in the original Super Nintendo version, just as a piece of trivia, you didn't have those abilities. I think they took them out because they thought Americans would make their own character die and not understand what happened. But it's been back in every other version since then.
Okay, so yeah, that was the easy version change then. I never played that version.
Well, yeah, the American version was, yeah, a lot of things were made easier in that. You do a lot more damage, they do a lot less to you. There's only like one item that you have to buy to cure you of any ailment, and it's really cheap. And all of the hidden passages are made actually visible and things like that. Like they thought we were
Oh wow.
really, really dumb and really bad at these
Wow, that's
games.
pretty condescending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hilariously, if you ever play the DS version, they go in the opposite direction. They make it much harder.
I think I may have interrupted you, Andrew. You.
Oh no, no. I mean, I was just gonna say that kind of wrapping up this Dark Knight element here, that they make the point that before you're equipped to fight the enemy without, you have to first master the enemy within, which I think that's a significant spiritual as well as just general philosophical concept. You can't clean up the world until you clean your own room.
Right. Yeah, I love the themes of redemption and repentance and forgiveness that are in it. Like at one point, Cecil washes up on the shore of Mysidia, the city that he sacks at the beginning of the game. And the people in town obviously don't like you, but they still send you on this quest to become a paladin and send a couple of their disciples basically with you to do it, which I think is pretty neat.
Yeah, that was something that I also thought was interesting because it's almost like um I don't know the right term for this, but it's almost like all of Mysidia, that city, is trying to figure out if they're willing to forgive you or not. Because most people there just hate your guts.
Right.
And once again, it goes to mechanics. Because you talk to the wrong person, they'll turn you into a pig and throw you outside of town,
That's
and then you have to
right.
figure out what to do. And so you do feel that like oppression, and then you're kind of like, I kind of deserve it for what happened there in the intro. And I think it's just like the elder is the only person willing to give you the time of day, and he's the one who sends Paolo and Porum with you, partly as spies, but he also does seem to legitimately want you to kind of atone, I guess, for what
Mhm.
happened.
It's like trust but verify, right? Like I'm going to send you on this mission, but also I'm going to keep some eyes on you.
Right. And Rydia, when um her mother dies because the bombs that you let loose killed her mother's dragon. Um, you defend her in the hotel, not the hotel, in the desert inn, from the people from Baron, and then she begins to kind of trust you. But he says, "Let me protect you. I don't care if you hate me, but please let me protect you." And I thought that was a pretty good moment.
Yeah, and then as they continue to get into the psychology of trauma, it's like now she's afraid to use fire magic because her town was burned by fire magic,
Right.
and so you have to get through that on a mechanic level as she has to melt some ice for you to go through the pass, and so it's kind of a little passing mechanical thing, but at the same time they use every opportunity to develop the characters to make some kind of point, narrative wise.
Yeah. And I do love how this doesn't have a job system, but every character has a built-in job that makes them unique. You have to think of unique mechanics for each character. And I have been playing Final Fantasy II since our last recording, and I haven't quite finished it, but there are ties between that and this that I've noticed. But in that one, yeah, you have your three main characters and then a fourth character that comes and goes as the story requires it. And I thought that was great, but I love how in this one, just every character can come and go as the story unfolds. Um, but yeah, there are things like Mysidia is the city of the mages in Final Fantasy II as well. And I even noticed that the young boy whose father was a dragoon, his name is Kain in Final Fantasy II when you talk to his mother. I don't think this is supposed to be the same world just a few years later, but I still think it's an interesting tie.
I have wondered if the story of 4 is inspired by 2, like, because Final Fantasy 2 also had a notion of a Dark Knight who had to redeem himself, like at the very end. He wasn't a playable character, but it's almost like they were thinking, well, what if we make him the main character of this other game and explore that theme further?
Yeah, and as I've said, that's one of the things that I really have been enjoying about playing these games back to back is that you really see when they do play with certain ideas, when they take some ideas and develop them, leave some things behind. It's interesting to see how they're kind of playing off of themselves.
So, how much do we want to delve into the different characters, of which there's like 100 of them, it feels like? Because I'm trying to think, okay, what are the themes that are being explored with Tella and oh my goodness, the Bard character, the Spoony
Uh,
Bard.
Edward,
Edward, yes. So, would you argue that's also some kind of redemption? Like, because Tella really didn't like that Edward ran off with his daughter or something.
And Edward, he has a redemption moment as well,
Mhm,
where he's because they talk about him being kind of this frail prince with a beautiful voice.
mhm.
But then he has to get up, stumble out of bed, and play the harp. I haven't. It's been a while since I've played that far in the game. But it's you're fighting like the dark elf or something, right? And he has to
Are
play
you
the music.
are you talking about like when it's night and he's like on the shore playing and then he gets attacked by like a merman or something?
Well, there's
He's in a
that.
kingdom of all women, right? And they're taking care of him, and he has to play the harp because he knows you're in trouble.
Oh,
Yeah,
that might
there's
be
some point
later.
later on in the game.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's that one part where he's playing the harp and by the seashore, and the spirit of his girl comes to him and says, keep going. But yeah,
hmm
later on, he when he's it. There's so much that happens in this game that I can't keep it all straight, even though I played it not too long ago. But he's like mortally wounded, but he stumbles out of bed because he just like senses his friends need him or something. So he
right,
plays his harp and gets him out of trouble. Yeah,
right. There's a dungeon where you can't wear any metal equipment or
right.
just can't move. And I think you get down there and have to fight some dark elf, and he does something to you that the music somehow wafts over into the dungeon, and the dark elf's magic is dispelled by it. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. These games really like to maximize this idea of like the power of friendship, where
Yes.
somehow you're in grave danger, and somehow your friends like just come to your aid in ways that don't always make sense. It's more of a metaphysical thing, I guess. But
Don't they do
Yeah.
that at the very end? Like everybody on the planet is like praying for you or something?
Right. It's like
right.
Dragon Ball Z with everyone is giving their strength to the heroes so they can get back on their feet and defeat the big evil. And you like see visions of them saying, you can do it. And everybody one by one gets all their health back and stands up. Yeah.
Yeah, they did that in three as well.
hmm
Having just played that. And I don't know if either of you guys are played it. It's a completely different series, but like Earthbound does that too.
Yes, it does. That's the big surprise at the end of Earthbound. That's a heck of a game. Yeah, Andrew, you should play that sometime.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. I have vague memories, but I don't know if I ever played all the way through or not. But I'll definitely need to return to that at some point.
It's a very weird game. I
It
played through
is.
it just a few years ago. I was like, what were there's people were I don't know how they got some of their ideas. I'll just say that. Um, I don't know. I'm kind of just interested in thinking about like the other characters. So like Rydia has interesting stuff going on where you lose her as a little girl, and then the next time you see her, she's suddenly much older, and is a more advanced summoner. Been a
Yeah.
while since I played, so I'm trying to remember kind of what was going on thematically there.
Yeah, she's swallowed by Leviathan, which is a recurring theme also from two.
Mhm.
Um, and she ends up in the Fey March, where the Eidolons live. Um, and that's Greek for like ghost or image and things like that, I believe. Like I think where it's used in the New Testament, it means like an idol, but I do think that they would use it for the term of a ghost or something. So they're probably in a Japanese way trying to say that this is kind of like the realm of fairy, basically. And there are literally fairies there, if I remember right. Um, I just remember having to use float on my whole team so that they wouldn't take damage from the tiles on the floor as I walked through that
I
area.
do remember that.
hmm
Yeah. And then you fight Azura, who's kind of the queen, and Leviathan is there as well. Azura is like a Buddhist four or five faced thing. I can't remember. And the heads would spin, and wherever it landed would determine what it does to you in this game. I remember having to cast a wall on myself so that I could bounce magic off myself to hit her. But yeah, I thought having a realm of the fairy in this was kind of an interesting thing. I don't recall other Final Fantasy games really doing that.
I mean, I suppose it's kind of similar to in six when you go to the land of the Espers.
Yeah, I
Right.
was just thinking of the Espers, and it's a whole plot point that the Empire invades their realm.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, it is interesting how the summons kind of increasingly get more agency, more character, more they become characters essentially.
hmm You got Bahamut eventually, and yeah,
Hmm.
and Odin. Those are recurring summons through the Final Fantasy
Hmm.
games. Eidolons are in other Final Fantasy games as well. The only one I can think of at the moment is 13. I can't remember if they're in other ones. I can Google it while we talk.
I'm trying to remember what they were in 13. That's
They
not
were
with
your
the.
they were your summons basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You had to learn how to impress them in order to recruit them in certain parts of the game. I found it really frustrating. But yeah,
It is a common thing in the later Final Fantasies to where you have to beat the summoned creature in battle before you can use them.
yeah.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like I'm trying to think. Okay, so what other characters are there? There's Sid. I don't know if Sid really does much. He has a heroic sacrifice too. Um, and he has a wife. I had forgotten that. It's like he's
Right.
this little squat guy with a beard. You don't think about him being married, but he but he
Yeah, and
is.
as a daughter, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
There's
always like Sid. I mean,
Yeah, he's a very different Sid from like Final Fantasy VII Sid. So
yes, he
they
is.
keep the name around and the notion of like this is the person that does airships, but he works a little differently in this
Hmm.
version.
Yeah, and then in 8 he's the schoolmaster, and in 9 he's not a great guy. He's been turned into a roach because he cheated on his wife or something. I can't quite recall. Uh,
Then
uh,
or go ahead.
nope, go
I'm
ahead.
just going through the characters in my
Yeah.
head, trying to remember them
Yeah.
all
There's
from memory.
Edgar, the ninja, or Edge, the ninja guy.
Yeah, Edge was the next one I was thinking of, and I'm trying to remember what was going on with him. Wasn't he like a prince or something? Or am I imagining
Was
that?
he?
Yeah, and his
Yeah.
parents, I think they did like experiments on his parents and they become monsters that you have to fight.
Right. Yeah. You fight them somewhere at some point in the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was dark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's very twisted.
and I mentioned Tella earlier, so I know he has to deal with this notion of revenge because he's like being very self-destructive in his attempt to take out Golbez. Because there's this whole thing about how he wants to learn Meteor, but he's so old that like just using Meteor has a risk of just killing him outright, in addition to causing however much destruction that it does. Um, and I can't remember exactly how that works out. I know you lose him at one point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he does die.
Yeah, so Golbez is threatening to kill Cecil, and he Tella jumps in there and fights Golbez and uses Meteor, which causes Golbez to pause a little bit and not to kill Cecil, which I assume means the brainwashing that the spell on Golbez was at least a little bit weakened there. There's a little bit of his sanity coming out, but in the process, Tella dies.
And I think he loses his control of Kain, or so it
Hmm.
seems, because Kain joins you at that point. And then later on, you find out, haha, I wasn't really on your side all along. But then eventually he really does come back around.
Hmm.
Yeah, it does
Uh,
feel like they want you to keep guessing with Kane like the whole time. Like,
yeah.
is he gonna come to our side or not?
Yeah, even in the beginning, when you get to the town and the bomb it kills all the summoners, he's like, "Well, we got to kill this little girl too." And you're like, "What? No!" And he's like, "Okay, I knew you'd say that. Let's not do that." But okay,
That was a test.
uh,
Yeah, Kane's a fun character in that story. There might be one reason why I think he's one of the more remembered of the side characters from that game.
yeah,
What do we make of the deep symbolism of a giant robot coming out of the Tower of Babel?
Don't you remember that part of Genesis to
I must
where
miss
they built
that.
the Tower of Babel and a giant machine came out of it?
uh,
You have to go into its head and defeat its CPU.
Yeah, that's what happened. That was
uh,
how everybody got different languages.
Just as the Babel builders had the CPU of their minds, messed with. I don't know.
Yeah, I that's another thing where it's like the whole like mix of fantasy and sci-fi that Final Fantasy loves to do. Like, does it ever really explain why they have all that technology in the Tower of Babel? Is it like the ancients had it or something like that? The people from the moon did?
Yeah, where did the Babel come from? Is that the Luminarians or are we ever told?
I don't know. This sounds like we're having a conspiracy podcast now.
I know, yeah.
So how did the Nephilim fit into this?
Maybe that was the giant. It was a Nephilim.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait, it's coming together.
So yeah, and I remember just wondering why are there two moons and they don't explain. And then at the end you learn that, one moon that you don't go to at all is because it's just our natural moon. And then the smaller moon is where all the lunarians are sleeping, or I'm not sure. But it's where so there's Zemus and then there's Zeromus is the real big bad at the end, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I don't remember how long ago they arrived at Earth. So I don't know if the ancient technology is theirs or if it's just the recurring theme of there's ancient technology. I mean, in Final Fantasy VII, there's guys excavating like an F-14 and nobody ever explains that at all, but it's just something that happens in the game. So I don't know. They just like having ancient technology.
It is a fun
Yeah,
world building thing. Like
yeah.
just kind of like, wait, what is that? It makes you
Yeah.
think, and then they just never explain it. So your imagination is left to do its thing.
Which I mean, it is a bit different than say you're reading, Tolkien, and for him, like you know that even if you never know what it is you're encountering, like he probably knows. Whereas with Final Fantasy, I feel like just stuff happens and they don't know why it's there. They just thought it would be cool. That's the
Right.
impression that I get.
And some of it does seem borrowed from Tolkien. When I think about some of these themes of like Rydia disappearing and then coming back as a more powerful thing, that's almost like Gandalf to some degree. And in the beginning you have the advisor whispering in the ear of the king, "Oh, Cecil is betraying you. You shouldn't trust him." And I didn't know anything about Lord of the Rings, when I was 15. But I can see some of those. I wonder if the creators were familiar with that and borrowed some of those themes.
I feel like anything fantasy, there's a very high chance the creator is familiar with Tolkien.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Tolkien created modern fantasy
Yeah, pretty
in
much.
in the way that we know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So basically, with the is it? I keep wanting to call them the Lumineers, but that's a band. What
The
are they?
Luminarians, I think,
I thought it was just
or the
Luminarians?
Lunarians.
Lunarians.
Lunarians. My
Lunarians.
bad, because
Lunarians.
Okay,
lunar.
that makes sense. Luna. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. So they show up from so originally they come from somewhere else in our solar system, like somewhere around like between Mars and Jupiter, I think. And then they're wherever there's that they're living on starts to I don't know fall apart or whatever. They have a need to move. So then they come to Earth, but humans aren't developed enough to live with them. I don't really know what that means, why they don't just I don't know, take over or something. But so they have to sleep for a while until humans are ready for them, essentially. And I forget where I was going with that. But that's the basic kind of setup for how they got here in our orbit.
Yeah, they don't explicitly say that it's Earth, but it does seem like it. And like the remains of their planet is the asteroid belt between Earth and Mars, I think. So yeah, but and Fusoya is one of the Lunarians, right?
Was
Um,
he Cecil's dad? I'm trying to remember the relationships of these characters.
no, Golbez is Cecil's brother. You just find out that you are like half Lunarian, I think, or
Hmm.
maybe all Lunarian. I can't remember. I do feel like you and Kain have kind of been adopted by the king of Baron before he got doppelganger switched, I guess, or whatever happened. But don't you? Now I'm remembering. Don't you find the real king of Baron in the basement, and it turns out he's Odin, right? Like, or is that separate?
Yeah, I think it's like you encounter his like the spirit of the king or something. He's not there in the flesh, but the
Okay.
spirit of the king. But he won't do anything with you until you go to the fairyland and come back for some reason.
Okay. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think he's related to Fusoya.
Which I mean, to me, I always makes me think of Skyrim. Some kind of dragon shout.
Yeah, that's right. Uh, well, gameplay wise, since I've been playing Final Fantasy 2, And it's probably because I was using the cheats, to get me extra experience and stuff. But I was often confused about where to go because it's really only supposed to be the overwhelming strength of enemies compared to your level that prevent you from going the wrong direction. And so I ended up doing weird things in Final Fantasy II, like rescuing all the guys from the Mithril mine before I went to the town where the women were wondering where their husbands were and stuff. And when I found it, they're all just like, "Thanks for rescuing our husbands." Um, but I think Final Fantasy IV does a good job of keeping you pretty much on a clear path while still giving you a sense of freedom. And it's not really until you get like the airships, where it sometimes is more difficult to know what your next move should be. But also in two, like getting the airship doesn't really, it only makes one new place available to you. And I like how in four, there's lots of little islands that you can visit and do little extra things on, like the island with the mini people and stuff like that. Uh, I like when you gain the ability to do further exploration as the game progresses.
Yeah, it does feel like four is very deliberate about what areas it allows you to go to at any given time, which
Mhm.
I think is pretty standard throughout the series. It does feel a little confining early on, where you're like, "Oh, if I've got all this place to explore. Oh, there's exactly one location I can meaningfully go to."
Yeah.
But it's in this kind of game, like the linearity is helpful to guiding the story and keeping you moving.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I will say that when you find out that you have to go to the underworld, that when I first heard I'm going to the underworld, I was thinking, all right, here we go, we're going to hell again. But it's no, it's literally just the world underneath. It's like the in Narnia, the Underland. But you go down there, and that's where the dwarves live. And it's kind of fun that you go there and you get caught in this battle, which I think that's when. I might be confusing this with one of the other games. Does your airship get broken up here, or am I mixing that up with the other game? Maybe
Uh,
not.
you have multiple airships in this one, I recall. You get the one that has the drill on the front, that's so you can go down there.
Right.
One point, you get like a claw so you can pick up the hovercraft and take it other places. And then, of course, you get the lunar whale
Right.
eventually. But um, Sid has to jump out with like a grenade
Hmm.
to seal up the entrance, and then somehow
Right.
he doesn't die. I don't know how that happened, but
The power
um,
of friendship.
right.
Fun fact, if you ever played specifically the Game Boy Advance Final Fantasy IV, which I played, at the very end of the game, all the characters who supposedly died are there available for you to bring back into your party for the finale.
Huh.
I don't know if it
That's,
does like anything like that in any of the other versions. I think that was just the GBA version.
yeah, I haven't. The
Hmm.
GBA version is a great
Mhm.
version, by the way, but they're all pretty good of four. I love the graphics in the PSP versions, but I really am enjoying the quality of life improvements in the Pixel remaster. I've only played up to the Kraken or whatever, where I've got Tella and Rydia, but I am enjoying it. It's funny as I've been going through the Pixel remasters, like the graphics don't feel very different on 4, 5, and 6. Just a little more polished, a little more depth to the colors, but like the enemy sprites and everything are just almost exactly the same. And the music doesn't even change that much.
I've been longing for a while for them to do like the HD 2D art style that they've got. They remade the early Dragon Quest games in.
Hmm.
I want them to do that specifically for 6 because I think it would look fantastic in that
Yeah,
style. But
I
that's
agree.
an artistic thing.
Mhm.
We forgot about Yang. That was another character. He's like the monk. I don't
Oh,
remember
yeah.
anything interesting going on in his story other
Right.
than there's this failed like defense of his city, and then he gets mind controlled for a bit and comes back to his senses.
And he's also someone who sacrifices himself.
Of course, they because most of the characters seem to do that.
Right.
And then there's Rosa, who's plays damsel in distress a couple of times, but I think she's one of the ones in your final party, right? She's like your white mage going into the final battle, or am I misremembering?
I
Because you have
don't
like five
remember.
specific people who stick around to the very end, and I
I
don't
think you're right,
remember the
actually.
exact
I
party.
think she sneaks onto the lunar whale. right as you go to the moon for that final time.
Yep. My connection went bad there for a sec, but I think I caught all of that. But yeah, one of my favorite things is always in JRPGs. I don't know if y'all are the same, but like rare, expensive items, I'm always saving them for a rainy day, and then the rainy day never comes, and I have a bunch of elixirs and stuff for the very final
Yep.
battle. But one of the things I love about Edge is, he has the ability to throw any weapon. So when I get to the final battle, like I'm throwing Excalibur and for 9999 at the final boss and stuff. I'm like, I know this is the end. I'm just gonna use all these things I've been saving, and it's pretty cathartic.
I'm getting this weird mental image of King Arthur throwing his sword at a giant alien flea to save the world on the moon.
That old trope.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the final boss was it Zimu Xenon?
It's like they call him Zemus and then they call him
Zemus.
Zeramus, and I'm not completely
Zemus.
clear on the relationship between those two.
I feel like Golbez and Fusoya go to fight Zemus, and then like they get they get wiped out, and then the real baddie Zeromus shows up. I think that's what happens if I remember right. The baddie behind the baddie.
Is the idea like Zeramus is like some evil mind control spirit that has basically been mind controlling Golbez and everybody else?
So my understanding is that he is basically just another Lunarian who happens to have these psychic abilities,
Mhm.
right? Especially over other Lunarians, such as Golbez.
Yeah, I'm looking at the synopsis on Wikipedia.
That's probably what
Arriving
I
on the
should have looked up
moon,
earlier.
arriving on the moon, the party meets Fusoya, who explains that Cecil's father was a Lunarian. Yeah, and then a Lunarian named Zemus plans to destroy all life on the blue planet so they can take over, using Golbez to summon the giant of Babel, a colossal robot.
Just
Yeah,
like the Nephilim.
Yep.
right, right. But Golbez and Fusoya kill Zemus, but then quickly fall to an evil spirit named Zeromus, the embodiment of all of Zemus's hatred and rage. There you go.
That's very, very Final Fantasy.
It is. Yeah.
So you go from in the first game where now suddenly you're after fighting against chaos, now you're fighting literally chaos itself, and so now you're fighting against literally hatred itself. It's very, I don't know, very, very metaphysical, very, okay, you're operating in the realm of the ideals here.
Yeah, I think that happens in others too. So like Final Fantasy 9, you end up just fighting an embodiment of death all of a sudden after there's all this like exploration of killing things. 5, I think, has a similar embodiment of hatred thing going on with X-Death. Um, X-Death's, this is for the next podcast, but X-Death is like a tree that gets like a bunch of evil souls like poured into it and then becomes like an actual uh like mind of its own.
X-Death is
Classic.
just a heck of a name. And
It
maybe it
is.
sounds cooler if you're Japanese, but
It
yeah.
it has kind of a Star Wars sound to it, doesn't it?
Right. I mean, I guess it's kind of interesting dealing with all this mind control stuff, as well as the opposition to that from these competing Lunarians. I mean, especially when you consider the symbolism of, the moon as that line between order and chaos, madness and reason, and that there's a reason why in to go to European myths like werewolves, right? They can be driven mad as reason gives way to the beastly by the power of the moon, but also it's silver, which is, in kind of alchemy understandings, like silver is produced by the moon, and so it's
Mhm.
like the very source of madness is also the source of reason that provides the cure. And so there is a lot of that order, chaos, madness, sanity wrapped up in the imagery of the moon, and that could potentially feed into some of these plot elements that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
So looking kind of into themes again, and the notion of redemption, do you guys feel like learning like the bad guys were just being mind controlled? Do you think that takes away too much from the notion of the agency of sin and like how we choose to sin and that's something we need to repent of? Don't you feel like it takes something away just learning the bad guys were just they were mind controlled. They didn't know what they were doing.
So I think that's part of what's interesting about Kain, because I feel like Kain is not letting himself off the hook. Like he makes it clear earlier on that he wishes that he had Rosa. And so I feel like he may not feel like he was being manipulated as much as he was allowing himself to be manipulated. Because at the end, he's on the top of Mount Ordeals because he wants to atone for his misdeeds. So I feel like he has a true desire to repent of his involvement and doesn't want to act like, well, I was just mind controlled, so y'all have to forgive me, kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. That he, on one hand, obviously he had this oppressive force placed upon his soul, upon his mind, but it's also a force that he did. It was working with some pre-existing material there that he
Sure.
gave himself over to, and I think that's exactly why they bring that stuff with Rosa at the very beginning to demonstrate the fact that he has something going on inside of him that can be exploited.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is an interesting one I've seen in other games or other stories in general. This is a different. I don't think either of you guys have played this, but specifically one of the later Trails games in Trails of Cold Steel, they play with this notion of mind control, which at first feels like it kind of cheapens some things, but then you learn like what's actually going on is like there's this like force that's like seizing on whatever evil impulses lie buried in people, and it just like brings those out further. And I think that's where mind control, like driving people toward evil, can be interesting because it's like we do have some level of sin we wrestle with internally, and we might be able to prevent it from appearing on an outward, like on the outside, but evil will continually try to draw that further out. And what if suddenly we realize we can't hide it anymore? Our sin is suddenly out there to be seen, and we have to wrestle with that.
Yeah, well, which again brings us back toward the beginning with Cecil's own redemption arc when, he has to face his own demons, his own darkness before he can go out and be set against the true darkness. Whereas Cain obviously doesn't deal with that. He doesn't have his ordeal until the very end.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's almost like with Cecil, you have like on the outside he looks evil because he's a dark knight and he's going out and doing bad stuff, but internally he has a conscience. So there's kind of like a goodness within the evil frame that is coming out that eventually helps redeem him, as opposed to like an evil within an outwardly good frame, then eventually overcoming and turning them completely evil. So the conflict between the outside and the inside, I think, is interesting.
Yeah, it's true because Cecil is never truly an evil character. He's just aligned with someone who is ordering him to do evil things. And in the beginning, they're on the airship and he's justifying what they've been asked to do. Like, hey, the king says the crystals are too powerful. We can't let them have them. Just them having them is a threat to our kingdom. So we got to go get them. We do what he says. You guys don't talk back. He doesn't know how to deal with it, but you can tell he's struggling with it because like the only animation they give the sprite is like for the ability for them to hang their head, and he does that a lot there at the beginning. So he's like in in this evil, involved, kind of wrapped up in this evil system, and he doesn't think he has the power to escape it or do anything about it. But then eventually, I guess with the encouragement of Rosa and the Mysidians, they help send him on that quest. So
It makes me think of I've been playing through six, and I won't get into the details. We'll get to that another time. But in that game, you some of your party members are formerly part of the evil empire, and that becomes a problem at one point. And it's said that okay, the empire's evil. That doesn't mean everybody in the empire is evil. And so they're good guys even on the bad team.
mhm. Yeah, I
Which
mean,
yeah, it's another one of those ideas that they're obviously working with.
yeah, he's just in the kingdom of Baron is where he lives. And so he's serving his king until he just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I think the complexity of civilizations and there being both good and bad people in them is one of the more interesting things that fantasy explores. I think sometimes it can cheapen the idea too much if the storyteller is not careful, to where it's like there's a whole discussion about. I have not watched Rings of Power, but I know like one thing a lot of people complain about is that it tries to redeem the orcs by showing some that are not like totally
They have
evil.
families.
Yeah. So, but it's like, but Tolkien, but like Andrew, you know Tolkien's intent better than me, but wasn't his intent that the orcs be kind of representative of like evil barbarism or something, and there wasn't supposed to be anything redemptive about them?
Yes, although I mean, to be fair, Tolkien himself did kind of struggle with the orcs as to the question of like, do they still have a soul? Because that they orcs as they are a perversion, but a perversion of something real. I mean, if you take the Silmarillion account, they are elves, or at least they were once upon a time. And so Tolkien does actually continue to struggle with the question of what exactly are orcs. Now, as they are manifested in the published writing, yeah, they're just symbolic of evil, but it's like there are some questions to be asked there. That being said, Tolkien never provides a path of redemption for them, and so when you get to Rings of Power and they are portrayed as being sympathetic, that's doing something that Tolkien was intentionally not trying to do, even though Tolkien himself has some questions in that vicinity. So it's kind of complicated. But to your point, yeah, Rings of Power is definitely trying to get you to have sympathy for evil as such.
Yeah. Yeah, not to veer us totally off of Final Fantasy. It's just like something that occurred to me as we're talking about that. Because it's kind of like what I was bringing up with Mysidia earlier, where it's interesting, like not everybody in Mysidia thinks the exact same way. Some people are more hostile to you than others. And the Kingdom of Baron, although it's doing evil things, it has people like Cecil and Rosa in it who aren't really on board with all that evil. And so there's that internal wrestling of each civilization, which with like within its people debating like what are we actually going to do as a people, and do we need to like change what our civilization is doing and how we're acting toward others. So that's a really interesting concept to me.
Well, as long as we were drifting into Lord of the Rings, I did think a little bit about Theoden when I'm thinking about people being under a mind control sort of a thing. It's not like quite the same, but I do feel like once he's freed from that control, he feels guilt about what have I been doing this whole time, the same sort of a thing. Now I haven't read The Lord of the Rings. I need to. So I've only got the movies to work from, so I don't know how it's portrayed completely in the books, but
Yeah,
Andrew really wants you to read them.
yeah, that needs to happen. But also, yeah, if you ever want to derail me on this podcast to start talking about Tolkien, because now I do have to say that, yeah, in the movies, Theoden is basically possessed by Saruman, whereas in the books, it's not quite so magical in that sense. That it's more that Wormtongue has just been speaking despair into his mind, and so it very much is more of a spiritual, psychological kind of thing rather than a magic that's placed upon him to the point where Theoden, like at any point, if he wanted to, he could just choose the side of hope. He could choose against despair, and so it's something that he's very much has given himself into. Which to bring us back to Final Fantasy might be something like what's going on with Kain, right? That he is giving himself over to his demons essentially, and in so doing, he becomes demonic.
hmm.
I did almost compare Baron to the Nice from That Hideous Strength. I'm like, is Cognizant Frost or the head?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you can do that with a lot of Final Fantasies, where you say ultimately at the head you have the macrobes. You get the demons in
Yep.
charge.
That's what Zerubus is. He's a microbe.
Exactly. It's all makes sense.
Yeah.
Trying to descend from deep heaven on us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
After I successfully derailed that completely.
I mean, I don't know. What anything else on your mind about Final Fantasy 4?
I will say there were some other interesting changes on the original Super Nintendo version. Like that is probably the worst version of the game to play at this point, but because of the way Nintendo was at the time, they were removed any references to death and any religious imagery like crosses. They changed holy magic to just be called white. And The Tower of Prayer, they changed to the Tower of Wishes, which I guess is better somehow. And I just always thought those sorts of things that Nintendo did in the late 80s and early 90s were just kind of weird and silly.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that they censored anything they thought might be religiously sensitive back then. They did it with Zelda too. Like I think it, like literally Zelda 2. At one point you would get a cross, but they changed it to something else in America. I think like a doll or something. Anyway, but besides that, like for final thoughts, Final Fantasy IV is a game like I'm glad we got in the US, even in its, I guess, neutered form. Because we missed out on 2 and 3, and later we missed out on 5. But 4 is significant for its attempt to tell more of a story. And I think that game probably did a lot in America to kind of make us rethink the ability of a video game to tell a story.
Mhm.
Because coming off of the NES, where you did not generally have like really sophisticated stories, Super NES, because of like what we were talking about, like it just being able to have more text allowed them to do more and experiment more with that. And so I think it probably had a big impact there. And like I said before, like it's significant when we can get games when closer to when they were released, because if it comes much later, you don't have kids growing up with it and having nostalgia for it so much.
Right.
That's why we don't really have much nostalgia for Final Fantasy V, even though I think it's a great game. But 4 people do because of that, and so that is significant for a game with a story to be able to get that nostalgia attached, because that helps build a general love of storytelling, and again helps build this notion that video games can tell stories.
Yeah, I think those are some good closing thoughts. David, do you have anything to add?
No, that was great. Did you prepare that? That was really good.
Nope. I was just thinking about the nice still. So.
Well, good. Yeah, I'm content with that wrap. And so we will go ahead and finish there. And next time we'll pick it up with Final Fantasy V. Till then, Godspeed. All right, thank you for listening or watching if you're over on YouTube. Hope you enjoyed that, as I know that I did. Next time, we'll obviously be getting into Final Fantasy V. As a reminder, we have the Elder Scrolls and Philosophy coming up in October, or it's going to start in October, but runs for 6 weeks. If you want to participate in that, then go ahead and become a Tier 3 patron. That will give you access to that course. I really look forward to putting this course together and going through it with you, and I really hope that you'll be joining me in that. I hope that we'll have a good, strong group dealing with what I believe is some valuable material, right? There's a reason why these games are as popular as they are. There's a reason why this franchise is as important as it is in the world of video games, as well as just kind of broader cultural realities. And so hope you'll join me in that study. Head over to patreon.com/mythicmind, become a Tier 3 patron, or if you don't want to do that, then, I mean, any level of support is certainly helpful, and will give you inner access to the Mythic Mind community. Now, if you want to continue listening to the freebie podcast feeds with ads, then you can make sure you're also subscribed to the main Mythic Mind podcast, as well as Mythic Mind movies and shows. If you're listening to this on the freebie feed, then the next thing to be coming out from Mythic Mind will be over on the main Mythic Mind podcast, where, see, I'm recording this in advance here. If I have the schedule in my mind correctly, the next thing will be beginning C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces over on the main Mythic Mind podcast. All right, well, that's it for now. Until next time, Godspeed. The Elder Scrolls and Philosophy, a new course beginning in October, led by Dr. Andrew Snyder. I played a lot of video games in my youth, perhaps more than I should have. But as I got older, got married, had kids, and completed a PhD on the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, I almost entirely stopped playing games. However, there were certain titles that stayed with me during this time, at the very least in my mind. In fact, looking back, I now realize that most games of my youth were not entirely frivolous, but they instead served quasi-literary roles, fueling my imagination, intellectual curiosity, and my appreciation for wonder. Chief among these titles are the mainline games of the Elder Scrolls, and in particular Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. And I know that I am not alone in this, as the wild success of the recent Oblivion remaster would indicate. Now, in addition to teaching university courses in philosophy and religion, I've also started offering independent courses to anyone who wants to come along with me and with the community in pursuit of wisdom through primary and secondary worlds. So far, these independent courses have been literature-based, such as The Fiction and Philosophy of C.S. Lewis, Life, Death, and Meaning with Beowulf and Boethius, The Lord of the Rings, A Brief History of Ideas, and Plato, Stoicism, and Till We Have Faces. However, I've recently been leading the Mythic Mind Fellowship into popular media as well, such as movies and games, and it did not take me many steps in this direction to decide that I wanted to do something with the Elder Scrolls. During this 6-week study of the philosophy of the Elder Scrolls, we're going to go deep into various aspects of Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim to better understand the driving forces of the sub-created world and our movements within it. Among others, we'll be asking questions like, what is the creation mythos of the Elder Scrolls, and how does this relate to primary world ideas? What are the 36 lessons of Vivek, and where do they direct us? What is unique about the hero of Kvatch's particular kind of heroism? What does the Oblivion Crisis reveal about the nature of evil in relation to societal institutions? Why are dragons so prolific in our fantastical imaginations? What unique opportunities for existential exploration are made available in open-world games? Join this community as we enter Tamriel with the purpose of learning more about our place within our own world. Each week will include ongoing Discord conversations, at least 1 or 2 asynchronous videos to watch whenever you want to, and live discussions, which will be recorded and made available if you're not able to participate. You can purchase enrollment in the shop over at patreon.com/mythicmind, or become a Tier 3 annual patron to get access to all courses that begin within your yearly term. This course begins in October, so go ahead and make it happen. And I hope to see you there.